Okay, so we just played a game of rock, paper, scissors, and Finn was the row player and Gracie was the column player. And so we we went through a couple of actions, but we noticed that if Gracie plays the scissors action every single time, she's going to win every time. That's what a negative means. A negative means that the column player wins and the row player loses. So if we know that Gracie's going to play scissors every time, then Finn's probably going to end up playing paper every time because that's going to minimize his losses. And that's kind of what we found. So here are some more definitions. Strategy is the action a player takes and how often he takes it. For instance, Gracie's strategy was to throw scissors every single time. Okay, that's an optimum strategy that is most profitable to the player. Finn's best strategy or optimum strategy was to throw paper every time to lose the least. Pure strategy is a strategy that consists of taking the same action every time. When we get to the new lesson on Wednesday, we won't want to do the same thing every time. But today we are. We're going to have pure strategies. We're going to do the same thing every time. The value of the game is just the result. And it looked like when they played this game, the result was -1. Strictly determined game is a game where both players play. Optimum strategy is to use a pure strategy. So that's the name of the lesson, strictly determined games. Strictly determined games, we pretty much know everything that's going to happen. We know what each player are going to do, and we know the value of the game. We know who wins, who loses, everything. A fair game is a game with a value of 0. This is a definition that most students that I've had mess up. Okay, you've got this intuition and this definition of fair game from growing up playing fair games, but don't think about your emotions and your feelings. Think about this definition. It is a fair game in this class if it has a value of 0. So, if a game is strictly determined, we already know everything that will happen. That is assuming all players make rational decisions. So what I mean by that is you're always going to try to act in your best interest. You're going to try to win the most money or lose the least amount of money. You're making rational decisions. You're not insane. The saddle point is the number in the payoff matrix that gives the value of a strictly determined game, as well as both players' strategies. I want to stress this only happens when it's strictly determined. Wednesday, it won't be strictly determined and we won't have a saddle point. But today we do, and it tells us everything. So what we're thinking when we want to try to find the saddle point, we're thinking about what's the worst that can happen. Okay, what's the worst that can happen if I do this? To find the saddle point, underline the smallest number in each row, circle the largest number in each column. If there's a number that is both underlined and circled, it's the saddle point. So example 2, that's what we're going to do. We're going to find the saddle point. Okay? But what we're thinking is, what's the worst that can happen? So if you look at the row player, look at if he plays row 1. Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen if he plays row 1? We'll lose 2. If he plays row 2, what's the worst that can happen? Lose 1. And if he plays row 3, the worst that can happen is lose 3. Okay? Now we look at the column player. It says circle the largest number in each column. Column player likes small numbers, so the worst thing that can happen is the large numbers. I think it's kind of difficult sometimes when you have to switch back and forth between the row player likes big numbers and the column player hates big numbers. But it says circle the largest number in the column because this number right here is the worst outcome for the column player. That means that column player loses 2. And this means the column player loses 2. And this means the column player wins 1. All right, so remember, you got to reverse your perspective when you're switching from a row player to the column player. Okay, so number 3 says, if there's a number that's both underlined and circled, that's the saddle point. So we have a saddle point of -1. Okay, that tells me the value of the game. The value of the game is -1, and both players' optimum strategy. I know the role player will play paper every time, and the column player will play scissors every time.